Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, March 16th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Senator Lindsey Graham calls for the U.S. to start shooting down Russian planes. So, Graham, the senator from South Carolina, has called for the U.S. to start shooting down Russian planes that encounter U.S. aircraft in response to the downing of the MQ-9 Reaper drone over the Black Sea. Graham told Fox News host Sean Hannity that the U.S. should tell Russia, quote, if you ever get near another U.S. asset flying in international waters, your airplane will be shot down, end quote. I'll let Mr. Graham speak for himself here. This is part of the clip from Hannity.
With a senator, a lot to talk about tonight. They shot down our drone. What should our answer be?
Well, we should hold them accountable and say that if you ever get near another U.S. set flying in international waters, your airplane would be shot down. What would Ronald Reagan do right now? He would start shooting Russian planes down if they were threatening our assets. American foreign policy is in free fall. I can't add much to what you've said.
All right, so I mean that's really the main part. He just goes on this ridiculous rant after that, but you get the idea. Calling for a huge escalation. And Hannity, man, Hannity is so horrible. This is the first time I've watched him in a while. But the story is, that the U.S. says that the Russian fighters intercepted the drone, clipped its propeller, and that it was downed after that. And then the Russian story is that they intercepted the drone, and then the drone made a sharp maneuver, and that's what caused it to crash. But either way, definitely risks in escalation. And Graham here is, really wants to escalate things. And, he goes on in this rant on Fox News to say that, if Biden doesn't take more action, World War III could break out, which is just nonsense because if Biden does take Graham's advice and start shooting down Russian planes, I mean, that seems like a pretty sure way to start World War III. That would kick off basically a direct war between NATO and Russia. And notice he says planes, he doesn't say drones. The implication being that he's talking about manned aircraft. He thinks the U.S. and Russian planes do have a lot of encounters out there, and other NATO countries are, in Europe, intercept and encounter Russian planes a lot. It happens, quite often, I think. So he's saying in those scenarios, the Russian plane should be shot down. It's just completely insane. And it's nothing new from Graham, but I do think, there are some hawks more than just Graham that think, the U.S. should take this moment to really escalate things against Russia. Luckily, so far, nothing like that has happened yet. But throughout the war, he said just insane things, Lindsey Graham. He's called for the assassination of Putin. He said somebody in Russia should take him out. And he also said that the war in Ukraine is only going to end if Russia is broken and somebody kills Putin. So that's the kind of rhetoric, that he is always spewing. So again, it's nothing new coming from him, but I do think there are a lot of elements in Washington that would want to use this incident to really ramp things up. Then the next one here is an update on the drone situation. So Russia is trying to recover debris of the downed U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. So Russian officials said this on Wednesday that they want to recover this debris. And this drone was downed in the Black Sea, somewhere near Crimea. So this is Nikolai Patrushev. He is the secretary of the Russian Security Council. He said, quote, I don't know if we can recover it or not, but we will certainly have to do that, and we will deal with it. I certainly hope for success, end quote. U.S. officials suggested, this is kind of strange. I don't really know what he means by this. This is John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council. And he suggested somehow that the U.S. has taken steps to prevent Russia from recovering this drone. Kirby said, quote, without getting too much detail, what I can say is that we've taken steps to protect our equities with respect to that particular drone, that particular aircraft, and its United States property, end quote. And then Kirby also went on to say that he doubts that the U.S. will be able to recover the drone. He said, quote, "It has not been recovered, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to recover it. I mean, where it fell in the Black Sea, very, very deep water. So we're still assessing whether there can be any kind of recovery effort mounted there. There may be not," end quote. A spokesman for U.S. European Command told Fox News that the U.S. currently does not have any Navy ships in the Black Sea, but there are several NATO allies that have Black Sea coasts, including Romania, Bulgaria, and of course Turkey, though I don't think Turkey would want to get involved in anything like that, but you never know with Romania. And where was I here? Oh, a U.S. official said that the drone that was down had taken off from a base in Romania. So, it goes to show, what this NATO expansion does mean, that the U.S. can just fly a drone, from Romania across the Black Sea towards Crimea, very easily. And that's because, Romania is a NATO country. So Patrushev also on Wednesday, he said that the drone incident was more confirmation that the U.S. was directly involved in the war in Ukraine. So the U.S. is still insisting, it was a routine surveillance flight, while the Russians are saying that the MQ-9 entered an area that Russia restricted, that they closed off for military operations. And they're saying that the drone had its transponder off. And other Russian officials say that the MQ-9 was collecting targeting data for Ukraine's armed forces, and it's not clear exactly what this drone was doing. But Ukraine does rely on coordinates provided by the U.S. for its rocket strikes against Russian soldiers, so it's not out of the realm of possibilities. Although I would guess that they could do that with satellites, but still, the fact that the U.S. is giving Ukraine, they say, "Hey, we want to kill these Russian soldiers over here. Can you give us the, coordinates?" And they give them to Ukraine, and then they kill the Russian soldiers. That's how involved in this war they are. And now that, they're flying these drones right there, Reaper drones that can be armed. I haven't seen the Russians say that they were armed, so I'm guessing that they weren't armed with missiles. So the U.S. And Russia, they've made conflicting claims, as I went over that already. But the U.S., where we're at right now, they're vowing to continue flying these surveillance flights, no matter what, despite the risk of escalation. This is Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He said, quote, "So make no mistake, the United States will continue to fly and to operate wherever international law allows. And it is incumbent upon Russia to operate as military aircraft in a safe and professional manner," end quote. So the next one here is related. Lloyd Austin actually spoke with Sergei Shoigu on Wednesday, and Shoigu is the Russian defense minister. So they spoke about this incident, and this is the first time since October that Austin spoke with Shoigu. High-level engagement between the U.S. and Russia has been very rare since Russia launched the invasion in February 22. The U.S. basically cut off contact with Russia initially. A few months went by, and I believe Austin Shoigu spoke in May 2022, and that was the highest level, conversation at the time. The real failure in all this is Antony Blinken, who's supposed to be, America's top diplomat. He's only spoken with Sergei Lavrov twice, and the one time at this G20 summit when they recently spoke, apparently they just chatted for a few minutes, and hasn't seriously engaged the Russians diplomatically, which means he's not doing his job because he's the Secretary of State. So Austin said this at a press conference on Wednesday. He was alongside Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Russian Defense Ministry, they confirmed the call and said that it was held at the request of the United States. The Russian Defense Ministry said on Telegram that Austin and Shoigu exchanged views about this incident. And then I just mentioned in the article, the conflicting claims, and the Russian Defense Ministry said that Shoigu, said it was the U.S.'s fault that they entered this restricted flight zone. And, of course, Austin disagreed with that. But I think at least it's good that they got on the phone after this. And it doesn't look like right now, again, I think, they're saying that they're going to keep these flights up. So, are they going to respond by doing more, by trying to get closer to Crimea and trying to test the Russians again? Who knows? There is definitely a chance of escalation, but right now, at least, it doesn't look like this one incident is going to spiral into anything. Nobody's really making threats against the other, so I think that's good. This could have been a lot worse. I think if the Russian plane did really collide with the drone and the Russian pilot was killed or something, that could set something off. So the next one here, senators are pushing for the U.S. to give Ukraine F-16s. So a bipartisan group of senators sent a letter to Lloyd Austin urging that the U.S. should take a hard look at sending F-16 fighter jets to Kiev. The letter said, quote, after speaking with U.S., Ukrainian, and foreign leaders working to support Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference last month, we believe the U.S. needs to take a hard look at providing F-16 aircraft to Ukraine, end quote. So this letter was led by Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona. It was bipartisan, 8 senators altogether. The other ones were Tammy Duckworth from Illinois, Tim Kaine of Virginia, Martin Heinrich of New Mexico, Jackie Rosen, Nevada, Lisa Murkowski, Arkansas, Tommy Tuberville, Alabama, and Ted Budd, who is from North Carolina. So, of course, sending the F-16s would mark a significant escalation of military aid. And I always have to point out how earlier in the war, NATO officials were saying, we're not going to send fighter jets because Russia might perceive that as the alliance directly entering the war. But here, Congress is really pushing Biden. The hawks in Congress, which is most of them, there's very few that are opposed to these escalations, are really pushing Biden. And Biden said recently that he ruled out sending the F-16s, for now, but that he ruled out other things before, like sending the Abrams tanks. Those tanks actually, they're not going to get delivered for years because they're actually being manufactured for Ukraine. But still, they say, it's in the works. And there are 2 Ukrainian pilots in the United States right now, and they're having their skills assessed to see how long it would take them to train them on the F-16. And these senators, of course, welcome that. They're very happy that, the ball is rolling on this. So I won't be surprised if we see eventually, I don't think in the immediate future, but maybe in a few weeks, a few months, that, Biden comes out and announces a big F-16 program for Ukraine. All right, the next one here, Canada. Canada's foreign minister says that regime change in Moscow is definitely the goal. So this is Melanie Jolie. She's the foreign minister up there in Canada. She said, this was last week. I missed it. Somebody sent it to me today. But she said that regime change in Moscow is definitely the goal. And she said this when announcing new sanctions on Russia. Canada is banning the import of Russian steel as part of its sanctions campaign against Moscow. So Jolie said, quote, we're able to see how much we're isolating the Russian regime right now because we need to do so economically, politically, and diplomatically. And what are the impacts also on society and how much we're seeing potential regime change in Russia? The goal is definitely to do that, is to weaken Russia's ability to launch very difficult attacks against Ukraine. End quote. So she says the goal is definitely regime change, but the situation with the sanctions, they failed to really hurt the Russian economy in a serious way. And if you look at Putin's approval ratings, this is the whole thing with sanctions, that they always say that we're going to put sanctions on these countries. It's going to hurt the economy. The people are going to get fed up and rise up against the government. But of course, that never happens. Look at Cuba, 1962, it was put under trade embargo, still the same government. But anyway, especially with the situation with Russia, when they first implemented these sanctions, you have Biden come out and say, oh, we're hurting the Russian economy. We're going to turn the ruble into rubble. Imagine there was a foreign country sanctioning us and saying that they're going to destroy the dollar. You think that's going to make you, hate your government, or is it going to make you not like that foreign government? It makes them kind of rally around their leaders in this way when they have this foreign threat to point to. But these provocative remarks from Jolie, it's not the first time that a NATO country's foreign minister has called for a regime change in Moscow. Lithuania's foreign minister did that last year. In March 2022, so a year ago, President Biden also declared that Putin cannot remain in power. And this was while he was in Poland. But the White House walked back his comments and said that, it's not U.S. policy that they're not pursuing regime change. But still, it was very provocative at the time. All right. The next one here, Ukrainian leaders say they will continue to send soldiers into the meat grinder in Bakhmut. So this is actually from the Libertarian Institute. This is Kyle Anzalone. Again, Zelensky met with his top military advisors and announced that Ukrainian troops will continue to fight for the Donbass city of Bakhmut. The battle goes on. The 9-month battle has been recently described as a meat grinder, and Kiev's Western backers are concerned that Ukraine is losing too many troops and weapons in the fight. So Zelensky held a meeting of his Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff, and they said that they all agreed to continue fighting for Bakhmut. And, as I've covered a lot lately, there's been a lot of stories, a lot of news outlets covering how the Ukrainian soldiers there are very poorly trained. They train them, some of them, for 2 weeks. They barely learn how to shoot a rifle, and they get thrown into this horrible battle that's going on, and they don't have much ammunition, and it's just a really horrible situation. But the fight is going to keep going on. And if you look at the map here, still Russia hasn't made any major gains recently, but they're still slowly encircling the city. They control the eastern district. And the Wagner guy, the head of the Russian mercenary group, said that the fighting's getting really intense. So probably a lot of people on both sides are dying. Just a horrible situation. The next one here, U.S. says that China is preparing for a war that it doesn't want to fight. So this is interesting. And this is a Defense Intelligence Agency official. So the Pentagon's intelligence agency. And he assesses that China's growing pessimism over its relationship with the U.S. is making Beijing prepare for a future war it would rather not fight. And this is Doug Wade. He is the head of the DIA's China Mission Group. He said this at a virtual event on Tuesday, I think. He said, quote, China doesn't want to start a fight with us over Taiwan. They will if they have to. They haven't ruled it out, end quote. So it's just interesting because I think he's right. And this is China's position, is that they seek peaceful reunification with Taiwan, but they don't rule out the use of force. And to me, it seems like an easy fix. If China doesn't want a war, then let's not give them a reason to start one, because it's clear if the U.S. keeps increasing its support for Taiwan in big ways, then that's going to make a war more likely. China's upping the military pressure. And I've seen this from other U.S. officials say this, that China doesn't want to fight a war over Taiwan. But it still seems like the U.S. is pushing, things in that direction. And of course, just the overall, the U.S. military buildup in the Asia Pacific, that, new bases in the Philippines, encouraging Japan to double military spending, deploying more Marines to Okinawa with missiles, opening new bases in Guam, all these things that are happening. Australia, of course, the AUKUS thing. I mean, that's huge. What's China going to do? Of course, naturally, they're going to start preparing for war with the U.S. because the U.S. is preparing for war with them. And as I've gone over a lot lately, U.S. military officials are more candidly speaking about the fact that they're planning war with China. They're not planning to support Taiwan in a war against China, like supporting Ukraine against Russia. They're planning to fight a direct war with Russia in, the Western Pacific, South China Sea, around Taiwan. So, of course, China's going to be preparing for war. I just thought it was interesting, to hear U.S. officials say, well, they don't really want war. So then shouldn't we try to avoid it? I mean, I don't know. And this guy Wade is saying that the two powers are entering an increasingly confrontational period, and he expects it to play out across all domains. He said, quote, it'll manifest itself pretty much across the spectrum, every warfighting domain, in every sphere of diplomatic, informational, economic, and commercial, end quote. That's why, I think a full-blown war, say in 10 years between the U.S. and China, if like space capabilities, anti-satellite missiles are really developed by then, if it doesn't go nuclear, it's still going to be just catastrophe for the world, for the two largest economies to fight this kind of modern war. Who knows what it's going to be like? So I just, I think we should really try to avoid it. And Chinese officials have been warning, as King Gong recently said, the Chinese foreign minister, if the U.S. doesn't change course, conflict and confrontation is in the future. All right. The next one here, a former Australian prime minister says that, this is the wrong, this article changed. It was, this is AP, so I have to figure this out. But former Australian prime minister, I forget which one, has come out against the AUKUS defense pact. And is it, yes, so it's at the bottom here. Sorry, AP does this. They change their stories. So this is former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating. He launched a blistering attack on his nation's plans to buy nuclear-powered submarines from the United States, saying that it must be the worst deal in all history. Speaking at a National Press Club event in Australia, Keating said the submarines wouldn't serve a useful military purpose. He said, quote, "The only way the Chinese could threaten Australia or attack is on land. That is, they bring an armada of troop ships with a massive army to occupy us. This is not possible for the Chinese to do." End quote. He added that Australia would sink any such Chinese armada with planes and missiles. He said, quote, "The idea that we need American submarines to protect us, if we buy 8, 3 are at sea, 3 are going to protect us from the might of China. Really? I mean, the rubbish of it, the rubbish," end quote. So he makes a good point. If Australia was worried about a war with China over in Australia, they should focus on missile defense systems and things that they could use to sink ships. But in this way, Australia is kind of going to go forward and deploy these submarines, to China's neck of the woods and help the U.S. in a future war in that region. So it doesn't seem good. But this is actually, sorry. So this story that the AP updated here, it looks like the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is saying that they're going to be very demanding in the overseeing of the U.S. plans to transfer nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, because there is that loophole that technically naval reactors don't require inspections from them under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But this is the first time that loophole is being used. So Grossi, the director of the IAEA, he's saying that they're still going to try to be involved. All right. So the next one here, momentum toward Yemen peace after the Saudi-Iran deal. So the UN's special envoy for Yemen said Wednesday that he sees a renewed momentum toward ending the war in Yemen following the surprise normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran that was brokered by China. The Saudis and Yemen's Houthis have been in peace talks, in Omani-mediated peace talks, on reaching either. It's not clear if they're going to work out, a final settlement for the war, or if they're going to extend a ceasefire that held for a while. It expired in October 2022, but there still haven't been Saudi airstrikes since then, which is good. So this is Hans Grundberg. He's the UN Special Envoy to the UN Security Council. He said, quote, "Intense diplomatic efforts are ongoing at different levels to prevent the conflict in Yemen." Man, I can barely talk. He said, "There's diplomatic efforts. They're ongoing at different levels to bring the conflict in Yemen to an end," end quote. And he said that they're witnessing, this renewed momentum, diplomatic momentum in the region because of this Iran-Saudi rapprochement. So there's kind of a misconception in Western media. The way they portray the war in Yemen is as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but that's not really right, because Iran is not nearly as involved in the war as the Saudis are. The Saudis are actively fighting there. And Iran's not involved as the U.S. is. Iran supports the Houthis politically. They deny Western allegations that they're arming the Houthis. Maybe they are to some extent, but we don't really know. And of course, we know how the U.S. gives, sells weapons to the Saudis and maintains their air force. It's just a completely different level than what they're even accusing Iran of. So that's a misconception. But still, again, they are politically aligned with the Houthis. So this deal, I think, can, help work toward this goal of a final peace deal in Yemen. So we don't have to worry about the war escalating. Iran's mission to the UN said Sunday that the normalization deal with Saudi Arabia should help bring about a political settlement in Yemen. And the Houthis, they also welcomed the deal. So there's all signs here that something's going to happen. So hopefully, if they reach a deal, then we don't have to worry about, again, there's been no Saudi airstrikes, but it could always pop off. It could always escalate, at any moment, really, this war. there has been fighting on the ground, but it seems like it's cooled off recently. So it's good. Hopefully, we see a headline about a peace deal in Yemen. That would be great. All right. The next one here, Riyadh investments could start very quickly following the deal with Iran. So Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Mohammed El-Jaddan, said on Wednesday that Saudi investments in Iran could happen very quickly following a reconciliation deal between the two countries last week, which was brokered by China. Speaking during a private sector forum of Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, Jaddan said that there are lots of opportunities for Saudi investments in Iran. So that's interesting. It's saying that they want to get the ball rolling with investment, because that shows that they are thinking long term. They're not just saying, yeah, we'll normalize and see how things go. This is their finance minister saying, yeah, we're going to get it going with investments, start making some money over there. And of course, Iran is heavily sanctioned by the West. So I'm sure the U.S. isn't going to be happy about this. So it'll be interesting to see how they react. And maybe this is, the Saudis are trying to test the U.S. here, see what they do. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. All right, the last one here. This is an article from Counterpunch, and it just is about how a concert in Frankfurt, Germany, a Roger Waters concert, was canceled because he's a critic of Israel. And this article is just about it, about how it's just a threat to, this type of artistic freedom that Roger Waters has. And it's all nonsense. They call him an anti-Semite for being critical of Israel. And the article points out that, outside, around the world, Roger Waters' views are not, very radical. There's all sorts of human rights organizations and people that have the same view. There was a letter sent to the city council, a petition calling for the German government to uncancel the concert. So, a lot of people don't like Roger Waters because of his, he's pretty outspoken on his political beliefs. All right, that's it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies, The Not So Winding Road from Iraq to Ukraine. One from Jonathan Cook, It's Not Just the Settlers or Israel responsible for the torching of Huwara. One from Jim Bovard, Pro-Censorship Democrats Whitewash the Federal Government's Iron Fist. One from Judge Napolitano, Spying in Plain Sight. One from Daniel Larison, Why the Iran-Saudi Agreement to Restore Ties is So Big. Definitely go check that out. He has a lot of insight on that part of the world. But that's everything for today. Support us, antiwar.com/donate. Support the show by sharing it around, subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.